Today I'm going to show you my favorite method for doing the underarm binding on the Solstice dress. Or the Solstice top. The method is the same either way, but I'm making a dress today, so I will say dress throughout the rest of the video. Um, when I say underarm binding, the part that I'm talking about is the seam finish that goes from right here around the underarm and up to the back bodice. And if you look inside, not sure if you can see that. Maybe you can see it's finished with a bias strip. So I'm going to show you the method that I use to sew on that bias strip. And yeah, let's get started. When you get to this step of the process, you'll already have the dress most of the way assembled. You'll just have this raw edge along the underarm that you'll need to finish. The way we do that is with this bias strip. This is piece G in the pattern. You'll have two of these pieces mirrored. It's cut on the bias, or maybe just a little bit off the bias if you are trying the method that I suggest in the pattern. The first thing you're going to want to do is grab one of the pieces and then fold down one of the long edges 1/4 inch and press. Sorry for the camera wobble there. I'm still learning to make these videos and I had my camera on the ironing board. That doesn't work so well. You'll notice that I'm using this handy little iron-on ruler. It's made out of material that you can iron right on top of, so I use it for hems, I use it for bindings like this. Obviously you don't need one, you can just eyeball it, but we're going for about 1/4 inch and you want to fold it down by that much across the entire long edge of the strip. Okay, next we're going to attach that binding strip that we just made to the underarm of our dress. You want to start about 1 inch away from the top of the front bodice and just work your way around, pinning as you go. When you get to the underarm seam, if you're making a dress with pockets, you want to make sure that that seam is pressed towards the front. Seems a little strange, but it will help the pockets lay more nicely when the dress is finished. If you're making a top or a dress without pockets, you can press it towards the back. And just continue working your way around. You'll notice when you get to the back, you'll have some extra. That's okay. That's what's supposed to happen. We'll clean that up in the next step. And we're going to do the exact same thing with the second binding strip on the other side. You'll notice that the dress is right side out right now, so we're attaching the binding strip right side to right side. So the right sides of the fabric should be facing each other. Now we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew that on with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Here I'm marking the point where I want that seam to start. So just outside the strap and right at the very top of the front bodice piece. So I mark that and I use that mark to put my needle down exactly in the right spot. And then I sew forward a couple of stitches and then back stitch, and then we can start the seam. So this is not a seam that I sew quickly. I take it nice and slow and I make sure at each little section that I don't have any tucks happening underneath, especially when I get to that center seam. And just kind of work the fabric around, making sure that you're not sewing any little gathers into it. And again, as I approach the end, I stop with my needle down and I fold back the binding and I mark the exact point that I want to aim for. All right, we're going to trim off just a little bit of that excess. And then we're going to trim down our seam allowance by about half. I like to fold the strap back out of the way so that I don't actually accidentally clip into it. And I use a pinking shears for this. I'm convinced that it helps the curve of the seam to lace more smoothly, a little like clipping into the seam. You can also just trim it down with a scissors or a rotary cutter. I don't measure how much I'm trimming off. I just try to trim about half. And there we go. Now we're going to take this over to the ironing board and we're going to press it away from the body of the dress. So I just give this a quick press. We're still working from the right side of the dress. And once you get that pressed away from the body of the dress, then we turn the dress inside out. Okay, now we're working on the inside of the dress, so on the wrong side. And you want to start by trimming down the end of that binding strip to about a ½ inch. I don't measure it, but you don't want too much fabric there to deal with. And then we're just going to press it back towards the body of the dress. When you do that, it encloses all those raw seams that from that seam allowance that we just trimmed down inside and makes a nice tidy edging. So just continue to do that around the edge. So where the binding goes over the side seam is the trickiest bit to get it to curve smoothly there without any tucks underneath. So I like to do that part first. And I press and pin right there and I make sure that the seam is going in the correct direction. As I mentioned before, that will be pressed towards the front of the dress if you're making a dress with pockets, or towards the back if you're making a top or a dress without pockets. Then once you've got that part of the binding pinned, you can work your way back towards the front. And then starting at the center seam again, we're going to work our way up towards the back bodice. Same thing that we just did on the front. Trim down that overhang a little bit, but don't worry about making it real neat just yet. We'll come back and tidy that up in just a minute. Okay, so once the rest of the binding strip is all pressed and pinned in place, you're going to come back in and tidy up these ends. So I like to trim the corners at just a little bit of an angle. Helps reduce some of the fabric bulk and makes it fold just a little bit more neatly. You want to open it up all the way. And then fold and fold again. And give it a good press. And that's it. Repeat on each of the other ends. So this part of the process can be a little fiddly. You'll see I had to undo my seam there at the side seam and redo it. That's okay, just take your time. And you don't have to fold under the ends the exact way that I do. That's just the method that I like. Okay, take it back over to the sewing machine one last time. And you're going to start just at that inside corner. You're going to back stitch to the edge. And then stitch right back to that corner. Lift your presser foot and pivot. And then edge stitch. So as close as you feel comfortable stitching to the edge of that binding, all the way around the edge. And again, this isn't a seam that I sew fast. It's much easier to go slow and get it right the first time. Though if you end up having to redo a little piece of it, that's okay too. And again, be careful when you're going around the side seam. That's the place that's most prone to unintentional tucks and gathers when you're stitching the binding on. When you get to the end of the strip at the back of the dress, you will want to stop, lift your presser foot, pivot, and do the same thing we did at the front where you stitch and then back stitch just to tack down the end of the bias strip. Okay, that's it. You're going to give it a final press. I like to press from the inside and then flip it open and press from the outside. If you did end up with any little tucks or gathers there around the side seam, try pressing it before you decide you need to redo the seam. Sometimes a good press will make those virtually invisible. And there we go. That is how I sew the underarm binding onto the Solstice dress. And here's the finished dress. How cute did this one turn out? I'll show you that underarm binding again. So you can see there's our line of stitching where we attached it. And there it is from the inside. Nice clean finish. Ta-da! If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you. And if you haven't grabbed this pattern already, available on my website, folkstead.com.